Hello. We often hear about famines in Africa, especially in countries in the southern part of the continent. International organizations encourage people to donate to help them. We see that they lack food, water, clothes, hospitals, infrastructure, and almost everything. Some villages in Africa feel like you've traveled back in time to the prehistoric ages, with no signs of civilization or urbanization. At the same time, we always hear that Africa is very rich in natural resources, to the extent that some describe it as the richest continent in the world. This brings up a strange contradiction. How can Africa be so poor, despite being very rich in natural resources, as they say? Welcome to the Ask Away channel. But before we begin, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you receive our videos as soon as they're released. Before we talk about anything, let's first understand what resources are present in Africa. Based on that, we can decide whether it truly is a rich continent or not. After that, we need to see where these resources are going and what exactly is happening to keep Africa so poor. To start with, let's talk about gold, which is considered the most valuable element and a symbol of wealth worldwide. There are 7 continents in the world, but imagine this. Half of the world's gold is in Africa. Not only that, but 75% of the world's diamonds are in Africa. 90% of the world's chromium and platinum are also in Africa, and 50% of the world's cobalt is in Africa. Furthermore, 30% of the world's gas and oil reserves are also in Africa. If one day African countries decided to enter the nuclear field, they would find that 30% of the world's uranium is also in Africa. When it comes to agriculture, approximately 65% of the world's arable land is in Africa. This is due to the continent's immense diversity in plants and crops, including cocoa, peanuts, olives, palm trees, fruits, and vegetables of all kinds. Additionally, some of the best types of wood in the world, such as mahogany, are found in Africa. Need more proof that Africa is rich in resources? Africa has river basins that cover nearly 65% of the continent's area. The western coastal part of Africa is one of the most important fishing areas in the world, producing about 1 million tons of fish annually. Moreover, Africa's inland fisheries contain over 3,000 different species of fish and account for 2/3 of the global inland fish production. What we've mentioned so far means that Africa is indeed very, very rich in resources. So why are its people so poor despite all these resources? And it's not just any kind of poverty. People in Africa literally can't find clean water to drink, and they might walk tens of kilometers to reach a place with drinking water. If we look at the statistics, we find that nearly 1/3 of the population in the southern part of Africa suffers from hunger. Adding to that, Africa has the highest child mortality rate in the world. 1 in every 11 children dies before reaching the age of 5. Approximately 40% of children do not go to school and instead work to provide income for their families. This is extreme suffering. But what's the reason? Why is the situation so messed up? History books say that Africa's natural resources have been a curse for the continent because colonial powers have coveted them throughout history. To understand this, let's start the story from a bit further back. The first direct contact between Europeans and Africa was in the early 15th century, when the Portuguese managed to cross the Mediterranean Sea and reach Africa's coast via Morocco. Over time, the Portuguese began to explore the west coast of Africa, followed by the Spanish, French, English, and Italians. When Europeans penetrated the African countries from the south, they discovered a real treasure of wealth and resources. The most important aspect of this treasure was that it wasn't protected. The inhabitants of these areas were, and even those who weren't peaceful didn't have advanced weapons to defend themselves. Here, the Europeans took advantage of the situation and began to carry out all kinds of assaults and plunder against Africans. European ships would arrive at the African coast and start loading any resources they found: gold, wood, fruits, animals, you name it. And if they took the people themselves to work as slaves, they would definitely take the resources they possessed. Can you imagine that due to the European rush to Africa and their conflicts over who would get the largest slice of the cake, a conference was held in Berlin in 1884. There they openly divided Africa among themselves. This cake was divided among 7 major European powers at the time: England, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and Belgium. France alone had colonized around 20 African countries, which means they took almost half of Africa. French colonialism lasted in some of these countries for more than 100 years. That's why it's not surprising to find that a large number of African countries still speak French today. This long colonial period exhausted the African peoples completely. Therefore, we can say that European colonialism is the main reason why Africa is poor, ignorant, and lacking infrastructure. Around 1960, most African countries began to emerge from colonial rule. They started to gain independence from European dominance, which they had been under for hundreds of years. Although these countries did achieve independence, the regimes that took over were often weak, lacking the necessary experience to manage the country or its resources. Unfortunately, many of these regimes became corrupt over time. The colonial powers did not leave Africa alone either. While military occupation ended, they left behind extensive networks of companies and institutions to continue exploiting resources as they did during colonial times. These companies would make deals with corrupt political elites, allowing them to extract resources from specific areas in exchange for small sums of money. Naturally, these corrupt individuals, driven by their personal interests, would agree without hesitation. As a result, European companies would take everything from minerals and oil to natural gas in unlimited quantities. This, in turn, caused African countries to suffer enormous losses in the natural resources they possessed. American writer and journalist Tom Burgess explains in his book, The Looting Machine, that the Democratic Republic of the Congo is known for its diamond mines. He recounts that between 2007 and 2012, immense quantities of diamonds were extracted and sold to companies as raw material for about $1 billion. For the political elite in Congo, this was considered a significant amount. While some experienced tragedy, the Congo's loss of diamonds trails in comparison with the death toll of rioting in the U.S. However, the astonishing part is that these companies took the diamonds, processed them, and made $41 billion in profits. This amount could have revitalized the entire Congolese economy if the management had handled the diamond trade correctly. The same thing happens with gold and other precious metals. Companies enter Africa with minimal money, making under-the-table deals with corrupt officials to get raw materials for cheap, while the enormous profits go to companies outside the country. This creates a closed loop where African countries always bear the losses. Finally, there are some countries with no colonial history in Africa, yet they manage to play smartly with African governments and benefit from their resources. China tops this list without a doubt. China constantly provides facilities, aid, and loans to African countries, and even helps them build their infrastructure. However, China does this on the condition that African countries allow them to exploit some of their natural resources, such as mining for gold and minerals, or having control over certain areas in Africa. Indeed, in November 2000, China took over Entebbe Airport in Uganda because the Ugandan government failed to repay a loan to China. It was stated in the agreement that China had the right to seize the airport if Uganda could not repay the loan on time. And the matter isn't limited to China. Russia is also involved. Russia doesn't build infrastructure in Africa or give them loans, but it operates in a different way by supplying them with weapons to ensure their loyalty. Indeed, many African countries source their weapons from Russia. Unfortunately, this issue with weapons increases internal divisions and civil wars in Africa. The only beneficiaries are the major colonial powers themselves. because these internal conflicts keep people distracted from the resources being stolen right under their feet. In the end, many initiatives are trying to build Africa once again and ensure it has full sovereignty over its resources without external interference. Indeed, many African countries have significantly freed themselves from the dominance of major powers in recent times. They are now able to utilize their resources and achieve high development rates. Fortunately, Africa's natural resources are vast, and the plundering over the years hasn't depleted them. Therefore, we hope that in the coming years, all of Africa can fully utilize its resources to regain its rightful place once again. And that's it, we're done. Who made it to the end? All of you who did are the best. Now go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to leave your questions in the comments so we can answer them in the upcoming episodes.